I still remember the sterile smell of antiseptic that hit me when I walked into the Soldier Readiness Medical Center that Monday morning in early September 2024. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with the humming of fluorescent lights and the steady shuffle of boots on the tile floor. I had been through countless Army physicals before, but that day, something was off long before the examination began. My parents had insisted on driving me to Fort Liberty, saying they wanted to be supportive before my promotion board. I knew what that really meant, oversight disguised as love. When I stepped inside the waiting area still in my pressed ICU, they followed behind me like they owned the building. The staff sergeant at the front desk raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Everyone assumes that officers have boundaries figured out. I didn't. CPT Samuel Reich, the physician assistant in charge of my section, greeted me with his usual calm professionalism. He was a compact man with tired eyes, someone who had seen too many deployments and too many young soldiers try to hide pain behind duty. "Lieutenant Caldwell," he said, scanning his tablet. "Periodic health assessment for promotion. Anything new since your last visit?" My voice came out steady. "No, sir." My father cut in from the doorway. "She bruised her shoulder in training last month." His tone was sharp defensive, the same edge that used to freeze the room at home. CPT Reich glanced between us. "Sir, this is a medical readiness exam. Family members aren't authorized in the exam room." My mother smiled as if to soften the statement. "We're just here to make sure everything's okay." I could feel heat rising under my collar. "It's fine," I murmured, but it wasn't. I could feel the pulse in my neck pounding as he asked me to remove my blouse so he could check range of motion. When the fabric lifted off my shoulder, I felt the air sting against my skin. The bruise had faded to a deep yellow-green, but the shape was unmistakable. 5 oval marks, distinct, deliberate. CPT. Reich's eyes narrowed. He didn't say anything at first, just reached for his pen light, inspecting the pattern quietly. The room seemed to shrink, the sound of the ventilation suddenly loud. "Did you fall?" he asked. "Obstacle course, maybe." Before I could answer, my father's voice cut through again, impatient. "It's from combatives. She's clumsy sometimes." My mother let out a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing serious." Reich turned to them slowly. "I'll need both of you to wait outside." The tone was polite but final. My father started to argue, but the captain's hand motioned toward the door with the authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice. The latch clicked shut behind them and the room exhaled. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I kept staring at the floor, at a faint scuff on the tile shaped like a half-moon. "Lieutenant," he said, finally softer now, "those marks don't look consistent with training injuries." I tried to swallow, but my throat felt locked. "It's fine," I said again, but the words cracked. He set down his tablet, leaned forward. "Ma'am, did someone at home harm you?" The question landed like a blunt force to the chest. My mind scrambled for neutral answers, the kind that had always kept peace. I tripped. I bruised easy. It's no one's fault. But the quiet in that room didn't leave space for lies. My hand trembled on my knee. "They get angry sometimes," I whispered. It was the smallest truth I had ever spoken, but it felt like shouting. CPT Reich exhaled slowly, reached for the small binder on his desk, flipped to a tab marked AR 608-18. I recognized the Cover Family Advocacy Program. "I'm contacting the Army, not your parents," he said. "You're not in trouble, but this has to be reported." My first instinct was panic. The rules of survival I had lived by since childhood screamed against it. Don't involve outsiders. Don't embarrass the family. But there was something in his tone, a steadiness that felt safer than silence. Outside the closed door, I could hear my father's voice rising muffled through the wall, demanding to know what was taking so long. CPT Reich didn't flinch. He wrote a note, pressed a button on his phone. Somewhere down the hall, a quiet alert pinged. I watched his hand move with precise confidence, the kind that comes from doing the right thing, enough times to believe in it. He looked back up. "You'll stay here for now. MPs will handle the rest." The words made my stomach twist, but part of me, some small buried part, felt a surge of relief. For the first time, someone was taking responsibility that wasn't mine. I sat there under the white light uniform, half-buttoned, trying to breathe. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs filled the silence like a heartbeat. I didn't know it yet, but that single question had just split my life in two. The room stayed quiet for a long time after CPT Reich closed the binder. I sat on the exam table trying to keep my breathing steady. The antiseptic smell still clung to the air, mixing with the metallic scent of the instruments on the counter. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured calm. Lieutenant Caldwell Army Regulation 608-18 requires me to document and report any injury that looks inconsistent with training or duty activity. That means this becomes official. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to answer. He pulled a tablet closer, tapping through the form fields. We'll start with clinical notes then, a sworn statement. You'll have the chance to write in your own words what happened. No one outside the medical and command chain will see this without your consent. His tone made it sound procedural, but the gravity beneath it was unmistakable. I tried to focus on the rhythm of his typing. Name, rank, unit, date of exam, observed injury, color pattern, patient statement. He paused before that last line and handed me the stylus. This is yours to fill out. My hand shook so much that the stylus clattered against the tablet once before I managed to steady it. I wrote slowly, choosing words that wouldn't ignite an explosion later if my parents somehow saw it bruising on left upper arm. Non-training related, origin unclear. It wasn't the full truth, but it was more than I had ever dared to record. CPT Reich read it, then added his signature beneath mine. That's sufficient for now, he said quietly. We'll attach photographs for medical evidence, nothing public. After that, I'll notify your company commander and the family advocacy program. The mention of command made my stomach flip. In my world, command meant performance evaluations, promotion boards, expectations. Not family. Will they think I'm unfit? I asked. He shook his head. They'll think you're honest, and they'll protect you. He turned to his phone and dictated a brief line to the clinic clerk, priority file family advocacy referral, non-duty injury, pending sworn statement. Every word sounded like a barrier forming between me and the chaos outside the door. When two MPs appeared 10 minutes later, their uniforms crisp and movements controlled, I felt the walls of procedure tighten into a strange kind of safety net. They didn't come in guns drawn or loud. They simply confirmed identities, logged the incident, and asked if the civilians in the waiting area were related to me. CPT Reich nodded once. Parents. They'll need to wait outside the facility until release. I heard my father's muffled protest down the hallway, a sharp tone that used to make me flinch. One MP answered evenly. Sir, this is a medical area. Please step outside. The quiet professionalism in his voice did more to protect me than any locked door ever had. Reich returned to the counter, retrieved a paper form from the drawer, and placed it in front of me. The top read, DA, Form 22823, Sworn Statement. He explained each section, identifying information, date, description of incident, signature. You can keep it brief. This starts the official record so no one can erase what happened. My pen hovered over the first line. The last time I had written something about my family, it had been a polite Christmas card that my mother dictated word for word. Now I was writing the beginning of an investigation. My handwriting wavered, but I finished the statement. Observed, repeated bruising. Reported pattern of control and verbal aggression at home. No current physical danger on post. It wasn't poetic, but it was enough. When I handed it back, Reich stapled it to the medical notes, stamped the top corner with the clinic seal, and slid the packet into a red folder marked Priority. The sound of that stapler felt louder than my heartbeat. This goes through internal channels, he explained. Not civilian police, not your parents. Army protocol protects its soldiers. That includes officers. He checked the time on his watch. Captain Chin will be notified within the hour. She'll arrange temporary quarters for you tonight. For the first time, the idea of not driving back to Raleigh didn't feel like failure. It felt like air. I followed him out to the corridor, the MPs standing at ease near the doorway. Through the small glass panel, I could see my parents on the far side of the lobby. My mother's arms were crossed tight. My father's jaw moved in silent fury as an MP spoke to him. They looked smaller from this distance, framed by fluorescent light and institutional walls. Reich handed me a small bottle of water. You should hydrate. Shock sometimes makes you forget simple things. He must have seen the confusion on my face because he added gently, "Your body isn't used to being safe yet. Give it time." We walked to a smaller office where he scanned the forms, uploaded them to the secure system, and typed a short entry. Subject calm, cooperative. Bruising consistent with controlled grip. Case referred to FAP per AR 608-18. Each keystroke felt like a step away from the old script of silence. When he finished, he looked up. "You'll meet with family advocacy tomorrow morning. They'll brief you on resources. For tonight, focus on rest." I nodded again, the automatic military answer, but my mind was still catching up. The phrase "protocol protects" echoed in my head like a new commandment. Outside, the late summer light had shifted to gold across the parking lot. The MPs were already escorting my parents toward their car. My father turned once scanning for me, but the door between us stayed closed. For the first time, I didn't move to follow. I pressed my hand against the folder Reich had given me. It felt heavier than any weapon I had ever carried. The drive from Fort Liberty to Raleigh should have been familiar enough to quiet my nerves. I had driven that same route for years past the slow stretches of I-95 through Dunn and Benson into the humid glow of the capital. But that Saturday night, September 7th, 2024, the highway felt tighter, the air heavier. The closer I got to my parents' house, the more my body reverted to old reflexes, checking the clock, adjusting posture, rehearsing polite answers. I told myself I was only stopping by to grab a few folders from my old bedroom training records transcripts and the yellow envelope marked commissioning paperwork. Nothing more. I parked in the driveway just before 9. The porch light flickered, throwing long shadows across the steps. Inside the house smelled the same furniture polish detergent, and something sharp like tension waiting to happen. My mother appeared first, her voice high with that practiced cheerfulness that meant my father was listening from another room. "You should have called," she said. "It's late. I'll be quick," I answered. "I just need some files from the cabinet." Her eyes darted toward the living room. "Your father's watching the news." I nodded, already heading down the hallway. The carpet muffled my steps, but not the sound of his chair creaking when he turned to look. "You're not staying the night?" he asked. "No, sir. I have duty early." "You always have duty," he muttered. Then, louder. "Leave your wallet on the counter. I'll check the card activity later." I stopped. The words hit the same place they always did, deep in the stomach where anger turned into obedience. "For oversight," he added. That was his favorite phrase. Oversight meant control, not care. I placed the wallet on the edge of the counter, hoping it would end there. It didn't. He stood tall enough to fill the doorway, the dim light tracing the deep lines around his mouth. "Keys, too. Dad. I just need to grab my folder." "You think you can keep secrets from family?" His voice carried the tone of a man used to being obeyed. I opened the cabinet fingers, shaking slightly. The folder was buried under an old stack of insurance papers. My father moved closer. "What's in there, Army stuff?" I said. "You wouldn't understand the forms." He stepped beside me close enough that I could smell the faint bitterness of coffee and aftershave. "Don't take that tone." His hand shot out not as a slap or a punch, but a grip hard around my left wrist right above the bone, the exact place where the bruise would later bloom. "You think you're grown because you wear that uniform?" he hissed. "You belong to this family first." My back hit the hallway wall with a dull thud. I froze the way my body always did, still silent, calculating. Fighting back never helped. Reasoning made it worse. The trick was to wait for the control to pass, like standing still during a storm. His fingers tightened until my skin burned. I could feel the pressure pulse with each heartbeat. "Let go," I said quietly. He didn't. "You come into my house and lie." "It's just paperwork," I whispered. The cabinet door swung open wider, scattering folders across the floor. The noise startled him enough that his grip loosened. I stepped aside quickly, clutching the folder to my chest. My mother's voice floated from the kitchen, brittle and practiced. "Please don't start tonight. She just got here." He turned toward her, still breathing hard. If she respected this house, there'd be nothing to start. For a moment, no one moved. The air was thick with unspoken rules. Don't escalate, don't humiliate him, don't leave yet. I took a small step backward toward the front door. I have to be on post by 6, I said. I'll call when I can. His glare followed me down the hallway. Don't think wearing bars makes you better than your family. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I don't, I said though, even I could hear how small my voice sounded. Outside, the night pressed warm and heavy against my skin. I walked fast to the car, keeping my left arm close to my body where the ache was already spreading. When the door shut, I locked it automatically and rested my forehead on the steering wheel. The clock on the dashboard read 9:37. I sat there for almost 5 minutes before starting the engine. The house behind me glowed in that same yellow light, still and ordinary, as if nothing had happened. The drive back toward Fort Liberty was a blur of headlights and empty exits. I kept flexing my hand, watching faint outlines appear where his fingers had been. By the time I hit I-95 again, the pain had turned to numbness. I focused on road signs: Dunn Fayetteville, All-American Parkway, small anchors in the dark. Every few miles, I repeated the same thought to keep my breathing steady. Obedience is safety. It had worked for years. It would get me through the night. When I reached the base gate, the MP waved me through with a polite nod. The familiarity of procedure, the ID check, the salute felt like entering a world that made sense. I parked in the officer housing lot and sat there until the engine cooled, listening to the faint ticking of metal. Under the fluorescent streetlights, the bruises hadn't yet darkened, only faint shadows under the skin. I touched the tender spot, then covered it with my sleeve. Tomorrow was Sunday, and I had planned to rest. Instead, I found myself checking my uniform for Monday's appointment, pressing each crease, making sure nothing looked out of order. If I looked perfect, no one would ask questions. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I promised myself that the bruise would fade before anyone noticed. It was a promise I couldn't keep. The door clicked softly behind the MPs as they stepped into the hallway. The change in air was immediate, still clinical, but quieter, like the building itself had exhaled after holding its breath. I sat back on the exam table, pulse still racing, listening to the muffled voices outside. Through the narrow gap under the door, I could see shadows shifting the outline of boots, the faint echo of controlled conversation. CPT Reich checked his watch, then returned to the desk. "They've been escorted out," he said. "They'll wait in the outer lobby until we finish. You're not required to interact with them again today." His voice was matter of fact, the tone of someone who had done this before. "Are they angry?" I asked. "They're confused," he said carefully, not meeting my eyes. "That's normal." He turned the monitor toward me, showing the electronic form already half completed. "Let's finish this together. Then I'll print the summary for your records." I nodded, focusing on the screen as he dictated. Non-duty injury. No indication of training-related mechanism. Reported as domestic in origin. Priority category per AR 608-18. Each phrase sounded detached, but the precision of it felt protective, like armor built from procedure. He asked for a time estimate. When did the incident occur? Saturday night, I said. Around 9:30, location Raleigh. My parents' residence. He typed without hesitation, marking the date. 2024-09-07. Transportation to base, personally operated vehicle. No delay in reporting. He checked a box labeled off-duty, non-training related. The cursor blinked beside the next line pattern of injury, consistent with controlled grip. My stomach clenched, but I didn't correct him. It was true. When he printed the report, the paper was warm in my hands. He slipped it into a clear folder and handed it to me. "This is your copy," he said. "Keep it somewhere safe. It's part of your medical record now." He paused, then added, "It's also proof you did the right thing." The words landed heavier than I expected. For years, every choice I made was about avoiding conflict, about keeping things from escalating. Doing the right thing had always meant silence. Now it meant documentation, signatures, paper trails. "Will someone call them?" I asked. "No," he said immediately. "We do not contact potential aggressors. All communication goes through command channels and family advocacy. You'll have a case manager by tomorrow." He walked to the cabinet, pulled out a thin, tri-fold brochure, and placed it on the counter between us. Across the top, in block letters, it read, "Family Advocacy Program. Support, not stigma." The cover showed a soldier silhouetted against morning light. He tapped the page with his pen. They'll handle your intake risk assessment and safety plan. You'll get a temporary lodging assignment tonight. Captain Chin will brief you." My chest tightened. Captain Chin. My CO. "Yes," he said. "You're her soldier. This stays internal to the unit until it needs to go higher. She's already been notified." The thought of my commander reading a report about my bruises made my stomach turn. "Sir, does this affect my promotion?" I finally asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "Lieutenant, this protects your promotion." He handed me another paper, a short form, half a page titled Command Notification, Health and Safety Flag. This just tells them there's an ongoing case. It's not disciplinary. It prevents anyone from sending you into a high-stress environment until the situation is stable. It's how the system says, "You matter." His words were simple, but the effect wasn't. I had never heard "you matter" in that tone before. Administrative, sure, but sincere in a quiet army kind of way. He stepped out to speak briefly with the MPs. Through the door, I caught fragments parents escorted no breach case number logged. When he returned, he set a water bottle beside me again. "I know this is a lot to absorb. You've done the hardest part already." "Talking?" I asked. "Letting someone else handle it," he said. His calmness made it easier to stay upright. I filled out one last signature line, initialed 3 boxes, and handed the clipboard back. The clock on the wall read 15:30. Outside the hallway, noise had thinned to a distant hum. "You'll stay here another 30 minutes, Reich said. "The MPs will clear the area before you leave." "Are they waiting?" I asked. He nodded. "They've been told to wait in the parking lot. If they attempt contact, MPs will intervene." My breath hitched. The word intervene sounded so formal, so impersonal, and yet it was the first real barrier I'd ever had. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, leaning one arm against the counter. "You're safe inside this building. You're protected here." The sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. For the first time in years, the weight of vigilance shifted off my shoulders. I nodded once, unable to speak. He looked at the faint bruise on my arm again, then turned off the exam light. The room dimmed to a softer tone. "You'll hear from Family Advocacy first thing tomorrow. They'll take it from here." When he left, I sat there with the brochure open on my lap, tracing the printed words with my thumb. Support, safety, dignity. They felt foreign, but I wanted to believe them. Outside, I heard the MPs' radios crackle as they moved down the corridor. Someone said my last name, confirming transfer complete. The air felt lighter. The antiseptic smell, the clicking pins, the cold tile, all of it now belonged to a different kind of memory. For once, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to leave. I felt like I was being given permission to stay safe. The company office was quiet when I arrived with CPT Reich. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, the end-of-day stillness settling over Fort Liberty. The MPs had already cleared the lobby. My parents' car had been escorted off post 30 minutes earlier. My uniform felt heavier with every step, the edges of the folder warm in my hands from clutching it too tightly. Inside the office, CPT Lily Chin was standing near her desk reading something on her monitor. She was small, but commanding. Her dark hair neatly pinned her posture sharp even at rest. When she saw us, her expression shifted from routine concentration to alert concern. "At ease, Lieutenant," she said, but her tone wasn't casual, it was protective. CPT Reich handed her the red-labeled folder. "Incident file, ma'am. Priority non-duty injury. Family Advocacy referral initiated." She took it without a word, opened it, and began to read. Her eyes moved fast, jaw tightening slightly as she reached the line that described controlled grip bruising, civilian guardians involved. She didn't ask for clarification. She didn't need to. When she finished, she exhaled through her nose, a soft but decisive sound. "You did the right thing by coming here," she said. I started to answer, but my voice failed halfway through. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Sit, Lieutenant. You're not under any kind of review. This is command support." I obeyed, sitting rigidly the way my training taught me to when adrenaline still buzzed through my body. She spoke with the tone of an officer who had seen soldiers come apart and knew exactly how to hold the line for them. "You'll stay on post tonight," she said. "We're authorizing temporary lodging at the visitor billets near the airfield. MP escort will take you there after this briefing. Your parents are not permitted back onto Fort Liberty without written approval from the provost marshal. I blinked, stunned by the precision of her words. That's official. It's already logged, she said, typing as she spoke. Their names have been added to the watch list at all access control points. If they try to come through any gate, they'll be stopped. The words sounded procedural, but there was a quiet strength behind them, a promise disguised as protocol. This isn't about punishment, she continued. It's about protection. You've earned that. I nodded, though the concept still felt foreign. She motioned toward the screen. Your company's S1 NCOIC, Sergeant First Class Hernandez, will help with administrative flags so your readiness file doesn't get delayed. I'll handle the battalion notification personally. She paused, eyes softening. You're not alone in this, Peyton. It startled me that she used my first name. No one in uniform ever did not during duty hours. For a moment, the air in the room changed less formal, more human. Thank you, ma'am, I said quietly. What happens now? Tomorrow, you'll meet with the Family Advocacy Program. They'll assess immediate risk and coordinate behavioral health. After that, we proceed like any other safety intervention documentation follow-ups and ensuring your chain of command maintains distance between you and your parents. She tapped her pen lightly against the folder. You'll get through this. Outside the window, the last streaks of daylight faded behind the pine trees lining the motor pool. The base was settling into its evening rhythm, soldiers heading home, distant bugle calls, the hum of air conditioning units. I realized I hadn't eaten since morning. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't tell if it was hunger or relief. CPT Chin noticed. She opened a drawer and slid a protein bar across the desk. Eat something. It's been a long day. The small gesture nearly broke me. I unwrapped it carefully as if it might disappear. Ma'am, what if they try to reach me? They won't, she said. But if they do block all numbers, you'll have a temporary government-issued phone by morning. All personal contact goes through your commander, not directly to you. That's an order. The certainty in her tone anchored me more than anything else could have. For once, I didn't have to manage everything alone. CPT Reich handed her a copy of the signed DA 2823. Her statement's concise and accurate. Medical follow-up scheduled for 48 hours. Photographic evidence logged in the system. Chin nodded, glancing back at me. Good. We'll update battalion with a secure brief. You don't have to speak during that. I'll represent your case. Represent. The word made something inside me loosen. All those years of speaking carefully, of being misquoted or ignored, and now someone else was willing to stand between me and the storm. The printer behind her whirred softly as she sent an electronic memo through. The screen glowed faintly in the dim office light. MP desk will confirm the watch list by 1900, she said, scanning the confirmation email. They'll issue an incident number. It stays confidential within post boundaries. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see Access Restriction Harold and Denise Caldwell, ACP2, ACP4, ACP6 authorized hold. Notification Command, 16th Sustainment Brigade Alpha Company. I stared at the words until they blurred. My parents' names on an official restriction list, it felt surreal, but also like justice beginning in paperwork. Chin stood straightened her uniform and extended her hand. You did well today, Lieutenant. You followed protocol even when it cost you comfort. That's courage. I rose, shaking her hand, feeling a strange steadiness spreading where panic had been. Thank you, ma'am. Get some rest, she said. We'll take it from here. When I stepped out of the office, the hallway lights had dimmed to evening mode. The air was cooler, quieter. A pair of MPs waited near the door to escort me to the billets. As we walked, one of them asked softly, You doing okay, ma'am? I hesitated, then said the truth for once. Better than I was this morning. The MP nodded. That's the goal. As we exited into the fading dusk, I glanced back at the office where CPT Chin still stood, talking quietly into her phone. The glow from her computer illuminated her face, focused and calm, a shield in uniform. That night, for the first time in years, I knew exactly what protection felt like. Do you believe a simple procedure can save a life? Tell me about a time when following the rules protected you. The next morning began before sunrise. I woke up in the temporary billet near the airfield, surrounded by the sterile comfort of government-issued linens and a silence that felt too large. For a brief moment, I forgot everything that had happened until the phone on the nightstand started to vibrate. Then again. And again. I turned it over. 37 missed calls. The same number flashed again as I stared Dad. Then Mom. Then home landline. They rotated like a carousel of ghosts, each voicemail notification stacked over the next, some short, some minutes long. I didn't press play. I didn't have to. I already knew the rhythm first, the shouting, then the guilt, then the pleading. I sat on the edge of the bed, the light from the window just starting to creep through the blinds, striping across my uniform folded neatly on the chair. My body was still sore, but it wasn't the bruise that hurt. It was the noise in my head, the instinct to respond to fix it to make them calm again. That reflex had always been my leash. I didn't even hear the knock at first. Lieutenant Caldwell CPT Reich's voice came from the hallway. I stood quickly pulling my blouse on halfway before opening the door. He was in his standard duty uniform holding a clipboard and a coffee cup. "Morning, ma'am." Captain Chin asked me to stop by before the FABI intake. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," I lied automatically. He looked down at my phone still buzzing on the nightstand. "I see that's not true," he said quietly. "They've been calling all night, haven't they?" I nodded, throat tight. 37 times. He set his coffee down on the dresser, the gesture precise, then reached into the pocket of his uniform and pulled out a small gray phone. "This is a temporary government-issued device. Secure line. No personal contacts, command and FAP only. You'll use it until the situation stabilizes." He handed it to me like a lifeline. "You'll also turn that one off," he added, nodding toward my personal phone. The thought made me freeze. "Sir, I can't. They'll keep calling," he interrupted gently. "They'll keep calling until you remind them you're still within their reach. This step isn't for them, Lieutenant. It's for you." He placed a form on the table. The heading read, "No Contact Directive, Temporary Military Safety Protocol." I stared at the words like they were written in another language. "This means what I asked. It means any attempt from them to contact you directly or indirectly will be logged as interference in an ongoing protective action," he said. "It's not criminal unless they persist, but it gives MPs authority to intervene." "You really think they'll stop?" I asked, a humorless laugh slipping out. He didn't smile. "I think you deserve peace, even if it's enforced." He turned toward the door, then hesitated. "Captain Chin will meet you at a FAP in an hour. In the meantime, I recommend turning that phone off." The moment he left, I stared at both devices, the sleek personal phone that had been my tether to chaos and the dull gray one that symbolized silence. I hesitated for almost a full minute before pressing the power button. The screen went black. My reflection disappeared with it. For the first time in my adult life, there was no line connecting me to their expectations. Just quiet. I expected relief. Instead, I started to cry. Not the loud, broken kind, but a silent release that felt foreign. The tears weren't about fear, they were about permission. Permission to not answer. Permission to exist without explanation. By the time I arrived at the Family Advocacy Office, my eyes were dry again, but the rawness lingered. CPT Chin was already there, standing with Andrea Morales, the civilian social worker assigned to my case. She looked up from the paperwork and gave a small nod. "Lieutenant, we've received confirmation. Your no-contact directive is active." She slid a copy across the table. "My parents' names were typed neatly under restricted parties. They've been notified through formal channels. If they attempt to call, text, email, or show up anywhere on or near installation property, the MPs will handle it." The certainty in her tone felt unreal. I signed at the bottom, my signature steady for the first time in days. Chin watched me closely. "How does that feel?" she asked. "Like the ground's still moving?" I admitted. She nodded. "It will for a while. That's normal." Raik entered a few minutes later with a folder and a small notepad. "Medical follow-up scheduled for Wednesday," he said. "Bruises healing normally. Documented photos stored under secure file." He paused, glancing between the three of us. "You're covered under the Army's protective procedures now, Lieutenant. That's not a favor, it's regulation." I could hear the subtle pride in his tone. To him, the regulation wasn't bureaucracy, it was belief. He turned to leave, then added, "One more thing, ma'am. Don't erase those voicemails. They're evidence if needed." I nodded. Understood. When the meeting ended, Chin walked me back to the hallway. The sunlight through the narrow windows was bright, almost blinding. She stopped near the exit and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You did something most soldiers never do," she said. "You trusted the system to protect you. That's leadership." Her words lingered even after she walked away. I stood in the empty hallway, the gray phone cool in my palm. For once, it wasn't the sound of a ringtone that filled the space. It was the absence of one. That silence felt fragile but sacred, like the pause before a new command. That night when I sat on the edge of the narrow billet bed, I opened the window slightly. The noise from the airfield drifted in distant engines, the hum of generators' life continuing somewhere else. I took the old phone from my bag one last time, stared at the dark screen, then placed it gently into the drawer and closed it. The click of the drawer echoed through the small room. It sounded final. Have you ever had to cut contact with someone to finally breathe? Tell me where you were watching from and how that silence felt. The Family Advocacy Program office was quieter than I expected. No fluorescent buzz, no echoing orders, just soft light filtering through half-drawn blinds and the faint scent of coffee. A framed poster on the wall read, "Support, Safety, Change." The words felt too calm for the way my pulse raced. Andrea Morales, the licensed clinical social worker assigned to my case, greeted me with a firm handshake. "Lieutenant Caldwell," she said. "I'm Andrea. I handle intake assessments for soldiers referred under AR 60818. I know this is new territory for you." Her tone was steady, neither pitying nor distant. She motioned for me to sit. "We'll go through a structured questionnaire. Nothing here is for punishment, it's for protection and understanding patterns. You can stop any time." She began with standard questions, demographics, rank, duty, status, but then the focus shifted. "Has anyone in your household ever monitored your spending?" I hesitated. "Yes. Without your consent." "They called it oversight," I said softly. She nodded, jotting a note. "Has anyone restricted your access to transportation money or communication?" My throat tightened. "Yes. They kept my debit card after I enlisted. Have they used religion or guilt to control behavior?" "They said obedience was godly." Andrea looked up, eyes kind but firm. "That's coercive control, Lieutenant. It's a form of psychological abuse." The term landed with an unfamiliar weight. I had heard words like discipline or correction my whole life, but never coercive control. It sounded clinical and undeniable, stripped of the excuses that used to cloud my memory. She continued, "Any instances of financial exploitation. My re-enlistment bonus," I said before I could stop myself. "They said they'd keep it safe." I never saw it again. Andrea's pen paused for a moment. "Do they contact you frequently, even after being told not to?" "Until yesterday," I said. 37 calls. That's harassment. It also fits a pattern of control that doesn't stop when distance is created." Her voice stayed calm, but the words sliced through the fog in my chest. Each question felt like peeling away layers I'd learned to hide behind. "Lieutenant," she said after a pause, "these behaviors, financial, emotional, physical, aren't isolated. They're components of abuse. The military treats this seriously, especially when the service member is the victim." I shifted in my chair, staring at the faint reflection of sunlight on her desk. "I never called it that," I admitted. "What would you have called it, family?" I whispered. Andrea's expression softened, but her tone didn't waver. "It's common for survivors of coercive control to normalize harm. It's part of what we call trauma bonding, a cycle where abuse and affection are intertwined until you can't tell which is safety." The phrase made my stomach twist. Trauma bonding. I repeated it silently, letting it echo in the corners of my mind. She leaned forward slightly. "When you feel anxious around authority figures, when you anticipate danger in calm situations, that's called hypervigilance. It's your nervous system staying in combat readiness even when you're not under threat." I swallowed hard. "It's exhausting. It's survival," she said. "But survival isn't living. For the first time, I didn't argue. She handed me a printed worksheet titled Pattern Recognition and Risk Mapping. Each line was a question I had never dared to ask myself. Who holds decision-making power in your family? What happens when you say no? I circled answers slowly, the words blurring in places where memory still burned too bright. Andrea waited quietly, giving space instead of sympathy. When I finished, she reviewed my responses, then opened a thin booklet from the file. This assessment helps us determine risk level and protection needs, she explained. You fall into Category 2, moderate risk non-imminent threat, but with a history of escalating control. That means we'll continue check-ins until stabilization. She looked up. Do you have any relatives or friends outside this dynamic you can rely on? Not really, I said. Most of them are from church circles my parents run. They believe everything they say. That's isolation, she said gently. Part of the same system. Her clarity was both terrifying and freeing. For years, I thought I was simply bad at boundaries, too sensitive, too dutiful, too afraid of conflict. Now she was showing me that those traits weren't flaws. They were symptoms of conditioning. You said earlier you never called it abuse, Andrea continued. Now that we've mapped it out, what word fits? I looked at the chart on her desk. The columns were labeled Control, Denial, Consequence. Every box was filled. Abuse, I said quietly. It was abuse. Saying it aloud felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. My heart pounded, but underneath the fear, there was something else, relief, sharp and clean. Andrea nodded. Good. Naming it is the first step toward reclaiming power. She wrote a note on her pad, then passed me a small card. This is your case number and my contact line. You can call or text anytime, even off duty. You're not navigating this alone. I tucked the card into my uniform pocket like a secret badge. She stood, signaling the end of the intake. We'll schedule weekly follow-ups for now. Behavioral health will coordinate with us directly. If you need housing extension or safety verification, we'll handle it. As she walked me to the door, she added quietly, Lieutenant, none of this disqualifies you from leadership. In fact, it shows it. I met her gaze. Because I asked for help, because you stopped pretending you didn't need it. Outside, the sunlight was harsh, but for once, I didn't flinch from it. The base traffic hummed in the distance, steady and normal. I slipped on my cap and took a slow breath, the kind that didn't catch halfway through. I had come to FAP expecting procedure. I left understanding survival. Have you ever realized too late that what you called love was control? Tell me what opened your eyes. The behavioral health wing of Womack Army Medical Center looked nothing like the rest of the hospital. No harsh lighting, no echoing hallways, just muted colors, calm music, and the quiet hum of an air purifier. I sat in the waiting area, my hands clasped around a paper cup of water, staring at the nameplate on the door. MAJ Erica Dalton Behavioral Health Officer. I had imagined something colder, something like interrogation. Instead, when she opened the door, she smiled with calm professionalism. Lieutenant Caldwell. Come in. Her voice was low and unhurried, the kind that carried authority without volume. The office was small, but warm bookshelves lined with binders, a model of the human brain on one shelf, and 2 chairs facing each other instead of a desk between us. She gestured toward the nearer seat. We'll skip formalities today, she said. You've had a lot of forms already. I let out a short laugh that sounded more like exhaling relief. She began with grounding, both feet flat on the floor. Feel the weight of your boots. Slow inhale through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. Count to 4 each time. It felt odd at first, too simple, but as she demonstrated her tones steady and rhythmic, my body began to unclench. That's regulation, she said after a few rounds. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a battlefield and a kitchen argument. You have to teach it that you're safe again. Her phrasing stuck with me. Teach it that you're safe again. She handed me a stress ball shaped like a globe. You can keep this. It's not a metaphor, though it might feel like one. I rolled it between my palms. So this isn't therapy, I asked. This is behavioral health care, she clarified. Not punishment, not command-directed discipline. You're here under a family advocacy referral which stays confidential except for risk updates. Nothing you say here goes in your performance file unless you pose harm to yourself or others. That clarity disarmed me more than any soft tone could have. I had half expected a hidden test, some evaluation to see if I was fit for duty. Instead, she treated me like a soldier navigating a new kind of terrain. She asked about sleep first. Do you wake up suddenly or stay alert at night? Both, I said. I check the door twice before sleeping. That's hypervigilance, she said. Your body still expects intrusion. It's normal after prolonged control. It wasn't combat, I said reflexively. It was home. Control is control, she said simply. Then she shifted topics. Tell me about when you enlisted. The question threw me off. I was 18, I said, after a pause. Senior year of high school. My dad said it was a phase. How did he react when you signed? He tore up the paperwork. I said quietly. I had to drive to the recruiter's office the next day and fill it out again. He followed me there. Did he stop you? Almost. He said no daughter of his would take orders from anyone but him. My voice caught on the memory. I could still see the parking lot of the recruiting station asphalt shimmering in the summer heat, his shadow falling over me. I signed anyway, I said. He didn't speak to me for 3 months after that. Meche. Dalton nodded, jotting a note but not interrupting. That was your first act of independence. Your nervous system learned then that autonomy equals danger. That's why it's hard to relax when you're safe. You associate peace with punishment. Her analysis was clinical but compassionate, the kind of truth that didn't sting, just landed. She switched gears again, showing me a diagram of the body's stress responses. This is why grounding and sleep hygiene matter, she explained. You've been running in fight or flight for over a decade. We start by retraining small things, breathing patterns, bedtime routine, controlled exposure to calm. Controlled exposure to calm, I repeated. It sounds ironic, but for trauma survivors, stillness can trigger panic. The goal isn't silence, it's safety in silence. She handed me a small notepad labeled Sleep Plan. Lights out by 2200. No phone for 30 minutes before bed. Write 1 neutral sentence each night. Something factual, not emotional. Like what example it rained today. The brain learns safety through ordinary detail. I wrote that down as if it were an order. She smiled slightly. You'll find that structure helps. You've lived your life in reactive mode. Now we rebuild it with intentionality. For the next few minutes, we discussed what to expect: weekly sessions, coordination with FAP, optional group therapy if I ever felt ready. She was careful not to push. Progress isn't about forgetting, she said. It's about reprogramming how your body interprets quiet. She paused before adding, You've spent years being trained to obey authority. Now the mission is to trust it again, but only the kind that earns it. I nodded, absorbing her words like coordinates on a new map. She noticed my hesitation and leaned forward slightly. Lieutenant, you're not broken. You're recalibrating. That line hit deeper than I expected. For so long, I had measured my worth in compliance and how well I could anticipate anger before it exploded. Now someone was telling me that my instincts weren't flaws, they were the aftershocks of survival. Before I left, she handed me a laminated grounding card with 5 short steps printed on it. You can use this before bed or after difficult meetings, she said. And if the past starts replaying too vividly, remind yourself this is now, not then. As I stood to leave, she added, One more thing. When you enlisted at 18, you didn't just join the Army. You joined an institution that believes in documentation structure and boundaries. Maybe that's why you've survived this long. The observation made me smile faintly. Maybe I said. She extended her hand. See you next week, Lieutenant. When I stepped outside, the midday sun caught the glass of the hospital wing. For the first time, it didn't feel blinding. It felt warm. As I walked back toward the billet, I repeated her words quietly. The body learns safety slowly. It wasn't a command, it was a promise. It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday at Fort Liberty. The morning air hung thick with late September humidity, the kind that made uniforms stick and tempers short. I was finishing admin work in the company office when the call came through the radio: Alpha Company stand by possible civilian disturbance at Access Control Point 2. Sergeant First Class Hernandez looked up from his desk, eyebrows lifting. That's your folks, ma'am. I didn't answer at first. The room went quiet, except for the faint static of the radio. A second voice confirmed it: vehicle attempting entry, silver Toyota Camry, registered to Caldwell Household, Raleigh. Refusing to leave until contact with Lieutenant Peyton Caldwell. My heart lurched. Even after all the forms, the restrictions, the directives, they had come anyway. CPT Chin appeared in the doorway within minutes, calm but focused. "Lieutenant, stay here," she ordered. "MPs are handling it. We'll coordinate with Provost Marshal." I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. "Ma'am, they'll cause a scene." "Let the Army handle the scene," she said, her voice sharp but reassuring. "You've done your part." She picked up the phone and called the MP desk directly. "Chin Alpha Company. Confirm status at ACP2 All-American Parkway Gate." There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end. "Yes, ma'am." Two civilians in a sedan demanding to see an officer on post. Driver male, mid-50s, refusing to move vehicle from lane 2. Chin's jaw tightened. "Maintain visual. Do not escalate unless breach attempted. Copy, copy." She hung up and turned to me. "You're not to approach. That's an order." I nodded, but my hands were already shaking. The distance between the company building and that gate was less than a mile, yet it felt like another world. Through the window, I could see the faint shimmer of heat rising from the asphalt road leading toward the checkpoint. The thought of my parents sitting there defying armed MPs made my stomach twist. 30 minutes passed before we got another update. The phone rang again. This time, Hernandez answered. "Alpha Company S1, Sergeant Hernandez." "Yes, sir." "Understood." He looked at me with a mix of sympathy and disbelief. "They got out of the car, ma'am. Tried to walk toward the guardhouse. MPs stopped them. Verbal warnings issued. If they cross again, it's detainment." I stood up my chair, scraping the tile. "They'll push it," I said. "They don't stop when someone tells them no." Chin's eyes met mine, steady. "That's why there's a fence and a protocol, Lieutenant." "Sit down." I sat, but every nerve in my body screamed to move. A soldier from supply poked his head in. "Ma'am, rumor says MPs blocked some civilians at the gate." That true Chin waved him off. "Back to work, specialist." She waited until the door closed, then said quietly, "Let them talk. Rumors fade faster than truth." A knock interrupted us, and MP Corporal stood at the threshold, crisp uniform tablet in hand. "Report from ACP2, ma'am." Chin gestured for him to proceed. "The pair was informed of the access restriction issued last week. They claimed they were here for family business. When advised they were trespassing, the male subject raised his voice. Female subject began recording on her phone. MPs issued final warning. 1 more step equals detainment." Both subjects complied after 10 minutes of negotiation. They've been escorted to the visitor staging area outside post perimeter. Incident logged under file 16 and SB 2024-0930. Chin took the tablet, signed the digital acknowledgement, then handed it back. "Good work, Corporal. Make sure the footage from gate cameras is archived." "Already done, ma'am." When he left, she looked at me again. "It's contained. You don't have to carry their chaos anymore." I exhaled shakily. "I don't know how to not carry it." "Then learn," she said softly. "That's your new mission." She turned to Hernandez. "Update the battalion staff and note that the no-contact directive was challenged but held." He typed quickly, entering the event into the duty log. "Incident: civilian attempt to access installation without authorization. Resolution: verbal warning, departure without detainment." I stared at the words on his monitor, clean, unemotional final. By regulation, my parents had just been turned away from federal property. By emotion, it felt like a lifetime boundary had finally been drawn. Later that afternoon, I sat outside near the motor pool helmet resting on my lap, trying to process it all. The sound of distant drills filled the air. Cadence calls, laughter, the clang of metal. Ordinary military life continuing as if nothing seismic had just happened. My phone buzzed, the secure one. A message from Andrea Morales at FAP Incident acknowledged. "Safety verification complete. You are not required to respond to any civilian inquiries regarding this matter. Command will handle further contact." I stared at the text until it blurred, the weight of those words sinking in. "You are not required to respond." That single sentence undid years of conditioning. For so long, every confrontation ended with me apologizing just to restore peace. Now silence itself was authorized. That evening, I walked to the gate, not ACP2, but the smaller pedestrian one near the training field. The MPs on duty greeted me with polite nods, unaware of how significant the sight of that gate felt. The barrier gleamed under the floodlights, simple metal bars separating base from highway. For most soldiers, it was just a security checkpoint. For me, it was something sacred, a border that finally held. I leaned against the railing for a moment, watching the headlights of cars passing beyond the fence. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably driving back to Raleigh, angry, confused, already rewriting the story in their favor. But they couldn't rewrite this. There was a record, an incident number, signatures in a logbook. Bureaucracy had done what love never could set a limit. The MP sergeant on duty noticed me and walked over. "Evening, ma'am. Everything all right?" "Yeah," I said. "Just needed to see the line." He nodded, following my gaze toward the dark road. "Funny thing about these gates," he said. "They look simple, but they're the reason order exists. Without them, everything spills over." "I know," I said. "It's the first line that's ever held." When I returned to the billet, I wrote my nightly sentence for M.A.J. Dalton's sleep exercise. I stared at the blank page for a long moment before writing, "The gate stayed closed." 3 words, plain and unpoetic, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. For the first time, I didn't dread closing my eyes. "The body learns safety slowly," she had said. Maybe that was true, but that night I finally believed safety could exist at all. The battalion auditorium smelled faintly of floor polish and burnt coffee. Rows of folding chairs lined the center aisle, the podium standing at the front beneath a projection screen that flickered with the words Command Readiness Town Hall, 16th Sustainment Brigade. It was a Friday morning near the end of September, the kind of mandatory briefing that everyone half listened to while pretending to check emails. But this time the air felt different, thicker charged. I sat 3 rows from the front beside SFC Hernandez, my posture straight, hands folded neatly over my notes. CPT Chin stood at the podium, her expression composed, voice carrying through the room as she reviewed logistics updates and personnel policy changes. Normal things, predictable things. Until the double doors at the back of the auditorium opened. I didn't turn immediately. I thought it was a latecomer, but the sudden hush from the soldiers near the entrance made my stomach drop. A figure moved down the aisle. Civilian clothes, gray hair, posture tense. My father. I froze. The private ahead of him, a young transportation specialist, looked bewildered, glancing between him and the MPs stationed near the exit. Somehow he'd slipped in behind the formation as guests were dismissed from a prior briefing. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this base. The MPs hadn't recognized him fast enough. By the time they started moving, he was halfway down the aisle. "You think you can keep me out?" he shouted. The sound ricocheted off the walls, slicing through the low murmur of the crowd. Every head turned. CPT. Chin paused mid-sentence, her hand hovering over her notes. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Sir, you need to leave," one MP said, approaching from behind. My father ignored him. "You ruined your family's name." His voice was hoarse, furious, trembling with something deeper than anger. Desperation. "You lied to them about us. You had your mother humiliated in front of the whole church." The words spilled out fast, frantic. "You made us criminals in our own town," soldiers whispered. Someone stood to block the aisle, but CPT Chin raised a hand. "Let him speak," she said firmly, then turned toward me. "Lieutenant Caldwell, stay seated." I wanted to disappear. My uniform suddenly felt like a target. The MPs closed in slowly, their radios crackling. My father turned toward them, still shouting. "You think I'm afraid of your rules? That woman's been poisoning you against your family." The woman meaning Chin. The commander who had protected me. The room vibrated with tension. Then, in a voice steady enough to freeze the noise, Chin said, "That's enough." She motioned for the MPs to stop where they stood. She reached into the folder on the podium, the one stamped with the brigade's insignia and the small gold seal of the command office, and pulled out a single-page document. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her tone calm but carrying. "You have entered a restricted facility under false pretenses. This is your official notification of removal." He opened his mouth to argue, but she continued reading directly from the paper. Per AR 608-18 and Fort Liberty Regulation 190-13, your access has been revoked following a confirmed family advocacy investigation. This is a command-approved summary of events. No personal details will be shared, but facts will be stated clearly. The entire room stilled. Her voice remained level, almost clinical. An Army medical officer identified injuries inconsistent with duty. A report was filed. A soldier cooperated fully with investigative procedure. All findings were validated. Command intervention was executed to ensure safety. No misconduct occurred within the chain of command. She looked up. That soldier is present today in uniform, performing her duties honorably. The silence was absolute. My father's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Around us, chairs creaked as soldiers shifted, realizing what they were witnessing: a commander publicly defending one of her own with the authority of regulation behind her. Chin folded the paper neatly, placed it back in the folder, and looked directly at him. "This post respects the law," she said. "That includes the right of our soldiers to live free from coercion, even from family." My father stumbled a step backward. The MPs moved in, not aggressively, just present, silent, professional. He looked around the room as if searching for someone to side with him, but all he met were straight backs and steady gazes. No one spoke. Even Hernandez beside me sat motionless, eyes forward. The weight of the truth had filled the air too completely for anyone to break it. My father's shoulders slumped. For a brief, almost merciful second, he looked old. Then the fight drained out of him entirely. One MP stepped closer. "Sir, we'll escort you out." He didn't resist. He just whispered something I couldn't hear. Maybe my name, maybe another accusation, and let them lead him toward the door. The sound of his footsteps on the tile echoed all the way down the aisle until the door shut behind him. The latch clicked softly, final. For a long time, no one moved. Then, CPT Chin straightened her uniform and turned back to the formation. As I was saying, she began, evenly, "Safety is readiness. When one soldier stands up for herself, the entire unit stands stronger." There was no applause, no cheers, just quiet understanding, respect. I felt it like heat spreading through the room. She didn't look at me again, but she didn't need to. The act itself had spoken louder than any private conversation could. Hernandez leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "You good, ma'am?" I swallowed hard, my throat thick. "I think so." "That's what winning feels like," he said. His words weren't loud, but they anchored me. After the meeting ended, people filtered out slowly. A few soldiers paused to squeeze my shoulder or nod as they passed the unspoken message clear. "We saw. We believe you." I stayed seated long after the room emptied. The sound of the air conditioner filled the silence, a steady hum that somehow felt like peace. Chin approached quietly. "He won't come back," she said. "We've confirmed with Provost Marshall. He's barred from all entry points indefinitely." I nodded, still processing the surreal reality that justice could happen in such a calm, procedural way. "You didn't have to read that," I said. "Yes, I did," she replied. "Silence protects the wrong people." Her eyes softened. "You earned this moment." For a long time, I couldn't speak. My whole life exposure had meant danger, humiliation, escalation, loss of control. Now it meant clarity. The truth wasn't a weapon anymore, it was armor. Later that evening, back in my billet, I replayed the scene in my head. Not the shouting, not the removal, but that single phrase she'd read aloud. No misconduct occurred within the chain of command. That line mattered more than any apology ever could. It meant the Army saw me as credible. It meant my life wasn't being measured against their denial anymore. I wrote my nightly sentence in the notebook from M.A.J. Dalton's exercise. Today, the truth was louder than fear. I turned off the light and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the low hum of crickets outside. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like I had to brace for something. The body learns safety slowly, but it also learns pride. That night, I let it. If your truth was ever denied, who would you want standing beside you when it's finally heard? Tell me where you're watching from and what truth you'd want, read aloud. By the first week of October, word had already spread through Raleigh like wildfire. It started with a quiet post in a local Veterans Council group chat. Someone who'd seen the confrontation at Fort Liberty wrote that a civilian relative had disrupted a military town hall and been escorted off by MPs. No names were mentioned, but in a community that small, they didn't have to be. My last name carried enough weight to connect the dots. Within days, the story grew. Legs, Caldwell family scandal officer, turns on her own parents' command intervention, no contact order. It reached the VFW post where my father used to hold Friday meetings, the same place I'd gone as a kid to hand out coffee and listen to him talk about leadership and sacrifice. That Friday, the meeting went silent when he entered. The commander, an old Gulf War veteran named Tom Sheridan, reportedly told him, "We can't have disruption attached to the Post-Herald." By Saturday, his name was quietly removed from the event schedule. The Veterans Council followed 2 days later, citing reputational conflict pending resolution. It didn't matter that there was no formal charge, just the optics were enough. Reputation in Raleigh was currency, and my family's had started to crumble. My mother called first, not to apologize, but to accuse. I didn't answer, but the voicemail came through anyway. Her voice was sharp, shaking with rage, disguised as grace. "Peyton, you've humiliated us. Do you understand what you've done? People are talking. Your father can't even walk into church without whispers. You've destroyed this family's name over a bruise, over nothing. You need to fix this. You need to tell them it was exaggerated. I listened to it 3 times, not out of guilt, but disbelief. Even after everything, after MPs, after documentation, after a public removal, she still believed the lie was the truth, and the truth was betrayal." She called again the next day. This time, the message was shorter, colder. "Stop making us look bad." Those words stayed in my head for hours. Look bad, not be bad. Not do wrong, just look bad. Image over integrity. It was the family creed, and I had broken it. A week later, a friend from Raleigh I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a text. "Saw your dad on local news. He said the Army took his daughter away under false accusations." I didn't bother looking it up. I already knew the script. I had lived it too long. Andrea Morales from FAP called that afternoon. We saw the statement she said. "Public misinformation isn't uncommon after exposure. Command is aware. You don't need to engage. They're ruining themselves," I said half to myself. "They think they're saving face." "That's part of the pattern," Andrea said gently. "Abusers often weaponize reputation when control fails. Let the story burn out, it always does. But it didn't burn out, it smoldered. Friends of my parents stopped replying to my messages. Old neighbors who once smiled when I drove home for holidays avoided me at the grocery store. My father's favorite phrase used to be "appearance is everything." Now he was learning what happens when truth gets louder than appearances. It wasn't vengeance, not exactly. It was gravity, consequences falling into place. Meanwhile, I kept showing up for duty. Chin never treated me differently. She just handed me tasks like everyone else: briefings, logistics forms, supply verifications. Normalcy became its own kind of healing. Every morning I would stand for formation and think I'm still here, still standing, still wearing the uniform he tried to own. Late one afternoon, Hernandez stopped by my desk holding a folded newspaper. "You might want to see this," he said carefully. It was the Fayetteville Observer. The headline read, "Local Veterans Council Member Resigns After Base Incident." The article was short and neutral, just 3 paragraphs describing a civilian confrontation at a Fort Liberty facility, followed by voluntary removal from the Veterans Council. My father's name was buried in the second paragraph. No editorial spin, no dramatics, just fact. Seeing it in print felt surreal. No yelling, no manipulation, no rewriting, just documentation. Paper doing what paper does best: preserve truth. "You okay, ma'am?" Hernandez asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just strange to see accountability in ink." "It's what you taught them," he said. "How to write the record straight." That night, another voicemail arrived, this time slower, quieter. My mother's tone had changed, not softer, just tired. "Your father's upset. He doesn't sleep. He keeps asking why you couldn't keep this private, why you had to involve the Army. You know how important his service reputation is." I almost laughed at the irony using service as a weapon against me when I was the one still serving. I didn't delete the voicemail. I saved it just like the others as evidence for myself. Proof of how deep denial can run. The next morning, I forwarded all new communications to FAP as required. Andrea's reply came an hour later. Acknowledged. No further action required. You're maintaining boundaries appropriately. I didn't realize until then that documentation had become my new form of prayer. Facts instead of apologies. Forms instead of begging for understanding. A week later, I had to drive to Raleigh for a routine dental appointment at the VA clinic. It wasn't connected to my parents, but the thought of being that close to the city made my chest tighten. As I drove past the familiar exit sign, Raleigh 12 miles, I realized I felt nothing. No dread, no nostalgia, just distance. It was raining when I reached the clinic, the kind of slow North Carolina drizzle that smeared reflections across the asphalt. After the appointment, I stopped by a small diner off Capitol Boulevard where soldiers sometimes ate during training rotations. I sat in a corner booth with a coffee my uniform cap resting beside me. Two older veterans at the counter were talking in low voices about that family scandal at Liberty. I froze, listening. One of them said, "Heard the daughter's an officer." "Good on her for standing up." The other shook his head. "Family's tough, man, but rules are rules." That simple exchange, casual, unknowing, hit harder than any headline. Ordinary people discussing my life without realizing they were giving me something I hadn't felt in months' validation. When I left the diner, I didn't look back. By the end of the week, my father's volunteer chair on the church board was temporarily vacated. A neighbor texted me that people stopped dropping by their house for Sunday cookouts. The small kingdom of control they'd built was cracking not because I destroyed it, but because truth had finally stripped away its scaffolding. Chin called me into her office that Friday afternoon. "You've probably heard what's happening in Raleigh," she said. "I have." "You don't need to feel responsible for their fallout," she said. "Every action has a chain of custody. Theirs does too." I smiled faintly. Chain of custody. I like that. "Keep doing your job," she said. "Let the paperwork and time handle the rest." On the way out, I passed a framed photo on her wall, a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I stared at it longer than I meant to. That night, another voicemail arrived, but this one wasn't angry. It was hollow. My mother's voice cracked halfway through. "We've lost everything. I hope you're happy." I didn't respond. I didn't even feel triumph. Just clarity. I wasn't happy they were still my parents, still human, but I was free. Freedom doesn't always look like celebration. Sometimes it looks like silence that doesn't ache anymore. I wrote my nightly sentence for M.A.J. Dalton's notebook. The world kept spinning without their approval. When I turned off the light, I realized something subtle had shifted. For years, every boundary I set was met with punishment. Now, for the first time, a boundary had held and the world didn't collapse. It just got quieter. Have you ever told the truth, knowing it would cost you your family's approval? Tell me what happened, and if you'd do it again. The Veterans Council building in downtown Fayetteville sat quietly on a corner lot, its flag half lowered under a gray October sky. The place was familiar yet distant, like an echo from a life I had already outgrown. I walked in wearing my Class B uniform, the same one I'd worn for my last inspection. Not to impress, just to remind myself who I was now. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee that had been reheated one too many times. Behind the reception desk sat a woman in her early 50s with short silver hair and a badge that read, "Elaine Porter, LCSSW. Veterans Council Liaison." She smiled politely, the kind of professional kindness that wasn't forced. "Lieutenant Caldwell, right on time," she said. "I've read the referral notes from Fort Liberty." "You brought your documentation," I nodded, placing a neat folder on her desk. Inside were 3 things: the command-approved summary from CPT Chin, the family advocacy verification, signed by Andrea Morales, and a personal timeline I had written 2 pages, objective, no emotion. Elaine opened the folder, carefully scanning the first page with practiced efficiency. "You've organized this well," she said. "You're not requesting punitive action, correct?" "Correct," I said. "I just want the record clean." "Accurate." She nodded, highlighting a section on the summary. You're doing this the right way. Most people come here demanding consequences. You're asking for documentation. Drama doesn't fix reputations, I said quietly. Paperwork does. That made her smile a knowing one. You're military to the bone, Lieutenant. But you're right. Justice isn't loud. It's legible. She flipped through each form, cross-referencing against her database. Command intervention verified. AR 60818 compliance confirmed. No disciplinary flags. No chain of command disputes. You've done everything by the book. She paused, looking at me. Do you want to include a personal statement in the file? Just one line, I said. That the report was true. Short and clear, she said, jotting it down. That's how truth survives revision. As she uploaded the documents to the Council's secure record system, I sat back and let the sound of her keyboard fill the room. Each keystroke was a small act of permanence, a counterweight to the years of gaslighting that had made me doubt my own memory. After a few minutes, she said, done. The file's archived under your name and cross-referenced with the family advocacy case number. Anyone reviewing future character references will see this summary, not gossip. I let out a slow breath. So it's permanent? As permanent as bureaucracy gets, she said with a grin, which in this building is close to eternal. She leaned forward slightly. May I ask something off the record? I nodded. Why didn't you ask for disciplinary referral? With what you've been through, no one would have blamed you. I thought about that for a moment, because I don't need revenge. I just need the truth to exist somewhere official, somewhere they can't rewrite it. Elaine studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That's cleaner than most people's justice. Documentation without drama. I smiled faintly. Paper beats noise. Always, she agreed. She printed a final receipt confirming the record upload and slid it across the table. Here's your verification. Keep it somewhere safe. It's proof you told the truth and the system heard you. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my jacket pocket. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked softly, filling the space between what was done and what was finally ending. Elaine broke the silence. You know, people think justice means someone losing. Sometimes it just means the noise stops. That's all I want, I said. Silence, that isn't fear. When I left the building, the wind had picked up. The flag outside whipped hard against the pole, the metal clinking echoing down the street. Across the parking lot, I could see my reflection in the glass doors, shoulders back, jaw steady. The uniform didn't look borrowed anymore. It looked earned. Driving back toward Fort Liberty, I stopped at a light near the courthouse. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years wishing for courtroom justice, a dramatic reckoning, someone shouting my defense. But in the end, the quiet signatures of honest people had done more. There were no raised voices, no tears, no vindictive speeches. Just a paper trail so clean it could withstand time. That was the kind of justice my parents would never understand, the kind that didn't announce itself. When I returned to post, I dropped the remaining copy of the verification into my personal safe in the billet. The sound of the lock clicking shut was oddly satisfying. Final. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done, not Chin, not Andrea, not Dalton. This wasn't about performance. It was about peace. That night, during my session with Dalton, I mentioned it briefly. You filed documentation, she said, nodding. That's a step toward closure. It didn't feel dramatic, I admitted. It felt administrative. That's good, she said. Trauma thrives in chaos. Healing thrives in procedure. Her words stayed with me long after I left her office. For years, my life had been dictated by other people's narratives, their tempers, their lies, their need for control. Now, for the first time, the official version of events belonged to me. No dramatics, no manipulation, just paperwork, the cleanest kind of revenge. When I wrote my nightly sentence before bed, it came easily this time. Justice doesn't need witnesses, it just needs records. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Have you ever realized that quiet proof can outlast loud lies? Tell me where you're watching from and what kind of justice you'd choose, peace or punishment. The call came on a Thursday evening just after dusk. The secure line stayed quiet, but my personal phone, the one I'd hidden in the drawer for weeks, lit up with an unfamiliar number. Something in my chest tightened. I shouldn't have answered, but curiosity still held a fragile thread to the past. I pressed the green icon and waited. His voice came through immediately, rough, rehearsed, trembling with self-importance. "Peyton, it's your father." I said nothing, waiting for the inevitable pivot from concern to control. It came quickly. "People are saying things that aren't true," he said. "They think I hurt you. You know that's not what happened. I need you to tell them it's a misunderstanding." He said the word misunderstanding like it could erase months of reports, affidavits, bruises, and silence. "You have no idea how hard this has been," he continued. "The council, the post, even the church, everyone thinks I'm a monster. You know how this town works, Peyton. Perception is everything. You've got to help fix this." I took a deep breath, the kind Major Dalton had taught me, steady grounding, count to 4. "You want me to fix your image?" I said flatly. "I want you to tell them you're not afraid of me," he said quickly. "That this whole thing was a family miscommunication." The phrasing was so absurd I almost laughed. "A miscommunication doesn't leave bruises," I said. He went silent. When he spoke again, his voice cracked with something unfamiliar, fear, not remorse. "I could lose everything. You don't understand how people look at me now. They whisper when I walk in. The Veterans Council won't even return my calls. Your mother won't leave the house." "Is that what you wanted?" "No," I said quietly. "But it's what you earned." The line went dead for a moment. No breath, no sound, just static between us. "You think this makes you better than us?" he finally said. "It makes you ungrateful. You're destroying your own blood." I felt the old reflex rise, the urge to explain, to placate, to soften, but I forced myself to stay silent. Silence used to mean surrender. Now it meant strength. "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm just telling the truth." "Then lie," he snapped. "For once, do something for your family." The irony nearly made me dizzy. I steadied my voice. "Family doesn't ask for lies. Command doesn't either." He exhaled sharply, the sound of defeat wrapped in anger. "You're going to regret this one day," he said. "When you're older, when you realize how reputation keeps you alive." "Reputation doesn't save anyone," I replied. "It just hides the wounds." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I said what I should have said years ago. No. Just that. No explanation. No compromise. A full sentence final. He tried to argue again, his words tripping over each other about forgiveness, about appearances, about the neighbors asking questions, but I ended the call mid-sentence. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful at first. It buzzed through my ears, a strange echo of adrenaline and grief. I sat there for a long time staring at the black screen, realizing that no wasn't just refusal, it was closure. The next morning, an email appeared in my government inbox. It was from Elaine Porter, the Veterans Council liaison. Following the recent call and public discussions, all related inquiries have been referred to official documentation. Your record remains intact and no further statements are required. I smiled faintly. The machine of bureaucracy so often criticized for slowness had become my quiet guardian. Paper didn't forget. Paper didn't need defending. By the end of that week, my father's final chair position, a local community safety committee, was listed as vacated due to personal reasons. It wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, exactly the way justice should be. I didn't post anything, didn't call anyone, didn't respond to messages from old acquaintances who suddenly wanted my side. The truth didn't need amplification. It had already been written, signed, and filed. Every time I thought about speaking up, I remembered Dalton's words. Progress isn't about telling everyone. It's about no longer needing to. One afternoon, I sat with Andrea Morales at the FAP office for a routine check-in. She reviewed my file, nodded approvingly, and said, "You've maintained zero contact since the call." "That's impressive." "It wasn't easy," I admitted. "He called asking for my help." "To fix his image." "Exactly." Andrea smiled, not with joy, but with recognition. "That's common," she said. "When abusers lose control of the narrative, they try to recruit you into their damage control. Saying no is how you prove you're healed." "It didn't feel heroic," I said. "It felt cold. Boundaries do, she replied. That's how you know they're working. I laughed quietly. That's the Army way, I guess. Cold procedures keeping people safe. No, she said. That's the human way. Structure lets freedom exist. I thought about that for a long time. Freedom wasn't fireworks or applause. It was a phone you didn't answer, a story you didn't have to defend, a truth that stood without your help. A few weeks later, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that my father had tried to petition the Veterans Council for reinstatement. They declined. The official reason was loss of public trust. He blamed me, of course. But this time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt distance, safe distance. I kept working quietly at Battalion HQ, finishing logistics audits, helping new soldiers adjust to protocol. No one treated me differently, they just treated me with respect. Chin passed me in the hallway one morning and said, "You heard from them lately?" He called once, I said, wanted me to fix his image. She gave a small, knowing smile. "You told him no, right?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said. "That's leadership." It wasn't a compliment about rank, it was about integrity. Later that night, sitting on my bunk, I scrolled through my messages. The last voicemail from my father sat at the bottom of the list. I didn't delete it, but I didn't play it either. I just let it sit there inert like a museum artifact, evidence of what used to control me but no longer could. Outside, the Carolina night was still and humid. Somewhere far off, a cargo plane took off its engines, rumbling like distant thunder. I wrote my nightly note in the same small notebook. Silence is not weakness when it protects the truth. The next morning, as I walked into the office, Hernandez handed me a coffee. "You look lighter, ma'am," he said. "I think I am," I answered. "Must be the paperwork catching up to karma." He laughed. "That's the best kind." And maybe he was right, because revenge hadn't come with shouting or spectacle. It had come in the form of policies, phone logs, signatures, and silence. The truth didn't need to fight back. It just needed to stand long enough for the world to notice who ran out of excuses first. My father had lost his voice trying to rewrite reality. I had found mine by refusing to speak on his behalf ever again. If someone once asked you to protect their image instead of your truth, did you say, "No"? Tell me where you're watching from and what that word cost you. When the reassignment orders came through, they arrived without ceremony. Just a crisp email from Battalion Operations, stamped with the subject line, "Temporary Duty Reassignment Battalion S1 Administrative Support." It wasn't glamorous work, but to me it felt like a soft landing after a storm. The S1 office sat at the far end of the headquarters building, its door always open, its walls covered with motivational posters and duty rosters. Inside, everything smelled faintly of printer ink and coffee that had been brewing since dawn. SFC Hernandez looked up from his desk the moment I stepped in. "Lieutenant Caldwell, right?" he said, grinning. "Welcome to the Chaos Factory." I smiled despite myself. "Thanks, Sergeant. I've heard this is where the real power hides." "Damn right," he said. "We may not carry rifles in here, but we control who gets leave and who doesn't. You'll fit right in." He introduced me to the team, Specialist Kim, who handled awards, Corporal Rivera, who tracked evaluations, and PFC Tanner, who made everyone laugh just by existing. The camaraderie was instant, unforced. No one asked about my past posting. No one whispered. They just cleared a desk for me, handed me a stack of files, and said, "Start here." For the first time in months, I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was just another soldier doing her job. The rhythm of S1 life was predictable, almost therapeutic. Morning formation admin, brief coffee paperwork, lunch at the DFAC, more paperwork, then lights out. Predictability was healing. My body started to trust quiet again. One afternoon, I was reviewing a stack of leave forms when Hernandez walked by and tossed a small envelope on my desk. "Don't open it until 1700, he said with a wink. "Orders?" I asked. "Sort of." I looked at the clock, 16:58. "That's close enough," I muttered, tearing it open. Inside was a simple note written in black Sharpie conference room. "Bring your smile." I frowned, but followed instructions. When I walked into the conference room, the lights flicked on and the team shouted, "Surprise!" A small chocolate cake sat in the middle of the table with a single candle burning. "What is this?" I asked, half laughing, half stunned. "It's your birthday, ma'am," Tanner said, grinning. "We checked your personnel record. You thought we wouldn't notice I hadn't celebrated a birthday in years." Growing up, birthdays were weapons rewards for obedience, punishments for defiance. The last time I'd blown out a candle, my father had stood behind me dictating what to wish for. "Be better. Be quiet. Don't embarrass us." I stared at the cake for a long moment, the tiny flame flickering. Hernandez clapped me gently on the shoulder. "Don't overthink it. Just make a wish and eat the damn thing." I took a breath, leaned forward, and blew out the candle. The room erupted in cheers and laughter. It wasn't loud or wild, just warm, real. That was the moment the tears came. Not the broken kind, but the quiet, grateful kind. Hernandez noticed, pretended not to. He just slid a napkin across the table. "Allergies," he said, smirking. "Happens to the best of us." The others laughed, and I laughed too, wiping my face. For the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider looking for a place to belong. I was home in the smallest, simplest way, a shared office, a burnt-out coffee maker, and people who didn't need my history to trust me. Over the next few weeks, that small team became my anchor. Rivera taught me how to navigate the maze of awards packets without losing my mind. Kim made me playlists for paperwork marathons. Tanner brought in muffins every Friday and claimed they were morale rations. And Hernandez, steady, reliable. Hernandez became the quiet compass in the background, checking in without intruding. One day, while we were reorganizing personnel files, he said, "You know, ma'am, soldiers always think they need to earn belonging, but sometimes it's just there waiting if you stop running from it." I looked up from the stack of folders. "You're wiser than you look, Sergeant." "Don't tell my wife," he said, grinning. "She still thinks I'm just good at laundry." That night, walking back to my billet, I thought about his words. Belonging wasn't something I had to beg for or prove. It was something that existed when the noise stopped. When I reached my room, I found a small card tucked under my door. It was from Hernandez's wife, whom I'd met only once at a unit barbecue. The card read, "You looked lighter today. Keep going." I sat on my bunk holding the card for a long time. Little things like that used to feel suspicious to me, every kindness an angle, every gesture a trap. Now they felt like sunlight warming a part of me I'd forgotten existed. The next morning, the office was busier than usual. An inspection was coming, and Hernandez was in his element, barking orders with good humor. "Caldwell, you're on awards tracking. Kim, print those DA 638s before they mutate. Tanner, no coffee until we finish this batch." I grinned, rolling my sleeves up. For 6 straight hours, we worked like a machine, typing, stamping, cross-checking. At 1600, we finished with 10 minutes to spare. Hernandez leaned back in his chair. "Not bad team," he said. "We just saved the battalion from another paperwork apocalypse." Kim threw a pencil at him. "You say that every week." "And every week it's true," he said. As laughter filled the office, I caught myself smiling for no reason. It wasn't forced, it wasn't armor. It was just me existing. Later, when the building emptied out, I stayed behind to tidy the desk. The hum of the fluorescent lights was oddly comforting. I opened the bottom drawer and found the folded birthday note still there. "Conference room. Bring your smile." I kept it. A reminder that some people see you not for your pain, but for your potential. On my way out, I passed the bulletin board where soldiers pinned photos, quotes, and jokes. Someone had added a new printout. "Belonging when the room gets quieter, not lonelier." I smiled, knowing who had put it there. That evening, I sat outside the billet, the warm North Carolina air wrapping around me like a blanket. In the distance, the sound of cadences carried across the parade field. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing safety, I was living inside it. I realized then that peace doesn't announce itself with applause. It shows up quietly in the form of a birthday cake, a shared joke, a team that has your back without needing to know your scars. I took out my notebook and wrote the line for the night. Maybe justice isn't just punishment. Maybe it's finally being somewhere you don't have to explain yourself. I closed the book and looked up at the stars over Fort Liberty. They didn't feel far away anymore. They felt reachable, almost familiar. Inside the barracks, I could hear someone laughing through the thin walls, Tanner probably watching another terrible comedy. For the first time, the sound didn't irritate me. It comforted me, because it meant I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Who gave you that feeling of belonging when you needed it most? Tell me their name, your location, and what they did. I promise I'll read every single one. The new billet wasn't large or elegant, but it was mine. The door shut with a sound that finally meant something: control. My assignment paperwork listed the location as Building 22127B, Room 104, Fort Liberty, Temporary Single Occupancy Housing under Administrative Protection. When I first stepped inside, the space smelled faintly of detergent and new paint. The bed was standard issue, the desk scarred from years of duty rosters, the single window looking out toward the quiet road that ran along the eastern side of Post. A military police cruiser rolled by every few hours, headlights gliding across the blinds. The first night, I didn't unpack. I just sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the hum of the AC unit, waiting for the knock that never came. The fear didn't vanish overnight, it receded like a slow tide. The next morning, I met with CPT Chin in her office to review the new safety plan. Standard FAP protocol, she said, flipping through the paperwork. You'll be assigned a contact schedule, 2 daily check-ins, and a rapid response code word for dispatch. She pushed a form toward me. This is the MP patrol request. You'll get evening drive-bys for the next 30 days. After that, it goes to weekly review. She paused. They're not babysitting you. It's just preventive visibility. I understand, I said. She smiled faintly. Of course you do. You read every regulation we cited in your report. That made me laugh softly. Habit, I said. Control through knowledge. Exactly, she said. Keep that. It's power. That afternoon, the MPs came by for an orientation. Sergeant Larkin, a tall woman with a steady voice, walked me through the procedures. If anyone unauthorized shows up, you don't engage. You call this number. She tapped the laminated emergency contact card. Don't argue. Don't explain. Don't apologize. I've been trained for combat zones, I said. This is just a different kind of perimeter. Exactly, she said. But this one's personal. Those are harder. I nodded. But at least the enemy's outside the gate now. That earned a small smile from her. That's the right mindset, Lieutenant. The safety plan was layered like armor: daily morning check-in with behavioral health evening text to the FAP liaison, and weekly sit-downs with Chin for administrative review. Everything was documented, time-stamped, procedural. Bureaucracy as therapy. The process was supposed to feel restrictive, but to me it felt like air returning to my lungs. Every rule was a wall I could lean against, every list a map of safety. After a week, the routine began to settle into rhythm. Wake at 0500, run 2 miles along the on-post path, just enough to feel my body moving, not to chase time. Shower, uniform, coffee, check-in call. Work at S1 until 1700. Dinner at the DFAC, always at the same table by the window. Lights out by 2200. It was the kind of structure that made chaos shrink. One evening, as I returned to the billet, I noticed the MPs parked at the corner, the same white sedan with blue lettering. They waved. I waved back. It wasn't surveillance, it was reassurance. The next day, I went to the PX and bought a few things that weren't on any checklist. A small nightlight for the corner, a picture frame for my desk. Inside it, I placed the team photo from S1, the one Hernandez had printed after the inspection. Everyone was smiling. I wasn't pretending in that picture. It showed. I also bought a small plant, a peace lily, because the clerk said it was impossible to kill. That made me laugh. Good, I said. We have something in common. At night, I started sleeping with the window cracked open. I could hear the faint sounds of cadence practice from distant barracks and the occasional hum of trucks along All-American Parkway. The sound was grounding. It meant life continued beyond fear. One evening, Andrea Morales from FAP stopped by for a home visit. She walked through the space, making notes on her tablet. It's minimal, she said approvingly, but you've made it yours. I like the silence, I said. It's clean. She smiled. Still, journaling every night. Good. Write about safety as something you do not, something you wait for. That's what this feels like, I said. Doing safety. Exactly, she said. Healing isn't passive. Before leaving, she handed me a copy of the updated no-contact directive. It included a printed notation, renewed for 12 months effective 15 OCT 2024. I ran my finger over the embossed seal. 12 months, a full year of distance sanctioned by regulation. That night, I placed it in the same folder as my promotion paperwork, not out of bitterness, but out of gratitude. Both documents represented something I'd earned recognition and protection. The following week, Hernandez dropped by my billet unannounced during evening rounds. He stood outside, hands in his pockets. "Everything good, ma'am?" "All good," I said. "No surprises." He nodded. "Just making sure the MPs didn't slack off. You've got a good patrol rotation." "They're consistent," I said. "I think they even know what coffee I drink now." "That's Fort Liberty hospitality for you," he said with a grin. After he left, I realized something that startled me with its simplicity. I wasn't living defensively anymore. I was living deliberately. Every locked door, every checklist, every procedure wasn't a cage. It was a framework for peace. Still, habits die hard. Sometimes I'd catch myself checking the lock twice, triple confirming the schedule. Dalton told me not to fight that instinct. "Safety rituals are normal," she said during our session. "They fade when your nervous system learns you're not in danger anymore." "When does that happen?" I asked. "Gradually," she said. Then, suddenly. 2 weeks later, I caught myself sleeping through the night for the first time. No dreams, no jolting awake, just stillness. The kind that doesn't feel empty, but full. On Sunday mornings, I started taking short drives off post-authorized documented down to a small diner near Fayetteville called Rose's Table. They had real pancakes, not DFAC powder, and a waitress named Millie who called everyone on. She didn't know my story, and that was the best part. To her, I was just another soldier ordering coffee and reading the paper. One morning she asked, "You live on post, sweetheart?" "Yeah," I said. "For now." "Good place," she said. "Safe." I nodded. "The safest it's ever been." Back on post, I added another small detail to my room, a corkboard above the desk. On it, I pinned reminders, the MP contact card, my class schedule for the upcoming leadership course, a photo of the ocean at Wilmington. Underneath, I wrote one line in black marker: "Order is peace." Each night as I locked the door, I looked at that board. Not to check for threats, but to remember what stability felt like. The plant on my windowsill had started to bloom, small white flowers curling open toward the light. I watered it every morning methodically like part of a ritual. It became my quiet proof that life could keep growing even in controlled environments. That's when I realized safety wasn't a place, it was a pattern. A pattern I had built line by line, routine by routine. And it was holding. That night, I wrote my nightly sentence. "Freedom is measured by how quietly you can sleep." Then I turned off the light and let the calm stay. What's the first thing you bought or did that made a place finally feel safe? Tell me where you're watching from and how you built your own calm. The coffee shop sat on the corner of Glenwood Avenue in Raleigh, a small place with brick walls, mismatched chairs, and the same faint smell of roasted beans that used to cling to my cadet uniform when I studied here years ago. Back then, my parents would sit across from me at this same table talking about responsibility and family image while I wrote essays about leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I walked in, this time, both of them were already seated. My father's posture was rigid, his face pale but composed. My mother's hands fidgeted with a paper napkin, tearing it into strips. Neither looked at me until I sat down. "Peyton," she started softly, "thank you for coming." I didn't answer. I just set my bag on the chair beside me and folded my hands on the table. "We wanted to talk face to face," my father said, clearing his throat. "There's been a lot of documentation," I finished for him. He grimaced. "That's one word for it." The waitress came by, took our coffee orders, and left us in the kind of silence that could crack glass. My father leaned forward, voice low and urgent. "You need to retract the statement." "There's nothing to retract," I said evenly. "It's not an accusation, it's a verified report." "Verified by your Army friends," he snapped, "not by anyone who actually knows the truth." "They know the truth because they listened," I said. "You never did." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I'd seen that performance before. "Sweetheart, you don't understand how this looks," she said. "The neighbors are talking." The church board won't let your father lead prayer anymore. Everyone thinks that you hurt your daughter, I interrupted. Maybe they're right to. She flinched, but my father didn't. His jaw tightened. You're not being fair, he said. We raised you, paid for your schooling. You wouldn't even be in the army if it weren't for us. You mean if it weren't for you controlling every choice until the army became the only escape. He looked genuinely stunned for a second, like he'd never heard his own tactics described out loud. The waitress returned with our drinks, setting them down gently before disappearing again. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with tension so thick it was hard to breathe. We came here to find a solution, he said finally. You can't keep this hanging over our heads. People think we're abusers. You are, I said quietly. I didn't make that true. You did. His voice dropped sharp and cold. If you were anyone else, I'd sue for defamation. Then sue, I said. Truth is a perfect defense. The words landed like a strike. For once, he didn't have a comeback. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled back before she touched me. You've changed, she whispered. No, I said. I stopped pretending. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. When I opened it, the gold rank bars inside caught the light. 2 parallel rectangles, polished and precise. I placed them on the table between us. These are mine, I said, earned, not given. They represent every hour I chose to build something real instead of surviving whatever this was. My father stared at the insignia, his reflection warped in the metal. What's that supposed to mean? It means you have no authority over me anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, a city bus hissed to a stop, but inside, the world felt suspended. My mother started to cry again quietly this time. We didn't come here to fight, she said. We came because we miss you. You miss control, I said. You miss the version of me who apologized for things you did. You're our daughter, she whispered. That hasn't changed. It has, I said. It changed the day I stopped calling what you did love. My father's composure cracked then just for a heartbeat. His voice softened, not kind, just tired. So what now? Now, I said, standing. Now you live with the truth the same way I had to live with fear quietly every day until it becomes part of the background. He looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. I picked up the bars, slipped them back into the pouch, and placed a $20 bill beside my untouched coffee. This covers all of us, I said. No debts left. My mother looked up, eyes pleading. Peyton, please can't we start over? No, I said simply. I'm not angry. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm just done. And it was true. There was no heat left in my chest, no trembling. Just the cool, steady calm of someone who had stopped trying to fix what was never hers to repair. I turned and walked toward the door, the bell above it jingling softly as I stepped outside. The October air was crisp, and for the first time, Raleigh didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a map I could fold up and leave behind. Halfway to my car, I stopped and looked back through the window. My parents sat there motionless. My mother's hand was on her cup, her eyes distant. My father was staring at the empty spot where my rank bars had been. He looked smaller somehow, like the illusion of power had finally drained out of him. I didn't feel satisfaction, just closure. I got in the car and drove toward Fort Liberty. The highway stretched out under a sunset that looked like freedom painted in gold and red. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just drove breathing evenly. When I reached the gate, the MP on duty saluted. "Evening, ma'am," he said. "Welcome back." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. Inside the billet, the night was still. I set the velvet pouch on my desk and took out the bars again, laying them next to the team photo from S1. The contrast made me smile, symbols of authority beside faces of belonging, 2 sides of the same piece. I sat down and wrote in my notebook, "Closure doesn't need fireworks. It just needs truth spoken once without fear." Then I underlined it twice. The sound of the AC hummed softly as I turned off the light. Outside, another MP car rolled past. Inside, the air felt weightless. No anger. No fear. Just the quiet satisfaction of a chapter finally closed. Have you ever had to tell someone they no longer had power over you? Tell me where you're watching from and what it felt like when you finally walked away. Leadership looked different now. It wasn't about commanding respect through rank or shouting over noise. It was about making safety something that others could feel, something that spread quietly the way calm spreads after a storm. In November, CPT Chin asked me to take on an informal mentorship role for new soldiers joining Alpha Company. You don't need to give speeches, she said. Just make sure they know where to go if something feels wrong. So I built a checklist, one discreet enough to slide into a field notebook without drawing attention. It listed 5 things: 1. Behavioral health, 2. Family advocacy program, 3. Equal opportunity office, 4. Chain of command contact, and 5. The MP desk hotline. At the top, I wrote in small letters, "You are not a burden for asking." I printed copies, laminated them, and left them in the day room beside the unit SOP binders. Within a week, I noticed one missing, then another. Someone had started handing them out quietly. That was enough. Sometimes leadership meant letting others borrow your courage without them ever saying thank you. During drills, I started to notice the small things: how Private Ellis stopped flinching when the platoon sergeant raised his voice, how Specialist Grant began talking openly about therapy, how soldiers checked in on each other more. Safety had become part of the culture, and it started not with policy, but with example. One evening, Chin stopped by my desk and said, "You've started something." "Just paperwork," I said. "That's what everyone says before they change a system," she replied. That week, I also started my night class at the University of North Carolina Wilmington Leadership and Organizational Development, an elective sponsored through the Army's Tuition Assistance Program. The drive took about 90 minutes each way, but I didn't mind. The route traced the same highway that once led me back to the house in Raleigh. Now it led toward something new. The classroom was small, filled with students of every age: civilian managers, veterans, and a few soldiers in uniform like me. The professor, Dr. Simmons, opened the first session with a single question: "What is leadership to you?" People gave the usual answers: vision, discipline, authority. When it was my turn, I said, "Leadership is making safety contagious." The room went quiet for a beat, then Dr. Simmons nodded. "That's the best definition I've heard in years." Over the next few weeks, the class became an anchor point in my new rhythm. We studied change models, conflict resolution, and organizational trust. I realized that everything I'd lived through, the silence, the exposure, the rebuilding, fit perfectly into those frameworks. It wasn't just trauma anymore, it was data. In one assignment, we were asked to write about a single moment that redefined how we saw leadership. The prompt was simple: what question changed your life? I stared at the blank page for a long time before typing A. Captain asked about the bruises. I described the pause that followed the stillness of that exam room and how that question had shifted my entire world from survival to awareness. When I submitted it, I expected a polite grade and nothing more. Instead, the professor called me after class. "Your essay," she said quietly. "May I use it in future lectures? It's powerful, as long as you remove my name," I said. "Leadership isn't about credit," she smiled, spoken like someone who understands it. Back at Fort Liberty, Chin asked me to help with a new initiative, a peer safety network, a volunteer-based pilot program to connect soldiers with confidential guidance before situations escalated. She said, "We need someone who's been through the system and still believes in it." "I do," I said, "because it worked." We spent weeks drafting procedures, reviewing legal guidelines, and coordinating with FAP and behavioral health. When the program launched in December, soldiers started calling it the Quiet Hotline. It wasn't official yet, but word spread, and when someone walked into my office and whispered, "Ma'am, I think I need help," I knew exactly how to respond. The first time it happened, I excused myself, closed the door, and said, "Sit down, you're safe," and I meant it. That moment, the calm after the storm, was what leadership was supposed to feel like. By Christmas, I'd earned enough credit hours at UNC Wilmington to qualify for the spring seminar on applied systems leadership. It was ironic, really. My life had been chaos, but now I was studying order, not the rigid kind, but the kind that protects. At night, driving back to base, I'd roll the windows down and let the cold air rush through. I'd think about all the people who had quietly held the line for me. Reich Chin, Hernandez, Dalton Morales. They'd never demanded loyalty. They'd modeled it. That was the lesson I wanted to pass forward. On the last day of class before winter break, Dr. Simmons asked everyone to read a line from their essays. When it was my turn, I said, "A captain asked about the bruises." The room went completely still. Someone in the back whispered, "That's heavy." I smiled faintly. "It's also the reason I'm here." After class, a young woman approached me. "I'm ROTC," she said quietly. "Your story, it helps. My mom's like that." I nodded, not intruding, just listening. "You'll know what to do when the time comes," I told her. "Just remember you're allowed to say something." When she walked away, I realized the ripple effect was real. One person's courage becomes another's permission. Back at Fort Liberty that night, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Safety is leadership in disguise." I underlined it once and closed the book. The MPs rolled past outside headlights sweeping over the window. The peace lily on my desk had grown another bloom bending gently toward the light. For the first time, I wasn't chasing closure anymore, I was building legacy. The next morning, as I walked into S1, Hernandez saluted with a grin. "Morning, ma'am. Heard the university might feature your essay." "Word travels fast," I said. "Good stories do," he replied. "Even the quiet ones." I looked around the office, the coffee cups, the laughter, the predictable calm, and thought, this is what right looks like. The Army hadn't just trained me to endure, it had taught me how to rebuild. And now it was my turn to teach others the same. Who asked the one question that changed your life? Tell me where you're watching from and what words you'll never forget. The day I signed the lease in Wilmington, the air smelled like salt and possibility. The apartment wasn't big, just a single bedroom with creaking floors, an old balcony railing, and a narrow window facing the Atlantic. But the first time I opened those curtains and saw the ocean glittering in the distance, I knew this was where I was meant to begin again. The move wasn't dramatic. No farewell speeches, no sentimental goodbyes. Just a few boxes my duffel and the quiet conviction that peace was waiting at the edge of that shoreline. Fort Liberty was only 2 hours away, close enough to visit, far enough to breathe. I drove east with the windows down, the hum of the tires blending with the faint rhythm of my new freedom. The air grew lighter the closer I got to the coast, as if every mile peeled away the last layers of what used to weigh me down. My new address read simply, Pier View Apartments, Unit 3B, Wilmington, NC. It wasn't much, but it faced the sunrise. That first morning I woke before dawn, laced up my running shoes, and stepped outside into the cool, salt-tinged air. The boardwalk was still quiet, except for a few early joggers and fishermen setting up along the pier. As I ran, the horizon began to glow pink and gold, the waves rolling in steady, timeless rhythm. It was the first sunrise I'd watched without fear of what the day might bring. When I stopped at the end of the pier, hands on my knees, lungs full of sea air, I realized something small but profound. I didn't need to look over my shoulder anymore. The only footsteps behind me were my own. Later that morning, I unpacked slowly, books first, then uniforms, then the photo from S1 that I placed on a shelf above my desk. Beside it, I set the small nightlight I'd bought for the billet. Old habits die hard. I still liked the gentle glow before sleep. The peace lily came too. Its leaves had unfurled fully small white blooms opening like quiet victory banners. That evening, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the ocean swallow the sun. The sound of the waves blended with the rustle of the trees and the distant laughter of people walking the beach below. I felt no jealousy, no ache, just stillness. Peace didn't roar. It whispered. Days fell into a rhythm, early morning runs, online coursework for my degree weekend, drives back to the base for check-ins. But Wilmington began to feel like more than a resting place. It felt like a home I had chosen. One afternoon, as I studied on the balcony, a neighbor named Clara leaned over the railing from her unit next door. "You military?" she asked. Was I said, smiling. "Still attached, technically." "Thought so," she said. "You've got that posture like you're always ready to salute the horizon." I laughed. "Maybe I am." She smiled back. "You'll fit in fine here. Most of us are running from something, but the ocean's good at helping you forget what." I didn't tell her that I wasn't running anymore, that forgetting wasn't the goal. Remembering without pain was. At night, I'd walk barefoot along the waterline, the waves brushing against my ankles, the moon reflecting in broken silver pieces across the surface. Sometimes I'd whisper the names of people who had helped me: Chinrike, Hernandez, Morales, Dalton. Each name carried gratitude into the wind like a private prayer. They were the quiet architects of my freedom, and I honored them in silence. On my third week there, a letter arrived from Fort Liberty. It was a commendation from the brigade for my initiative in peer safety mentorship. The envelope also included a short handwritten note from CPT Chin: "You made safety contagious, Lieutenant. Keep spreading it. Proud of you." I held the note for a long time, tracing the ink smiling through tears I hadn't expected. That night, I framed it beside the photo and the peace lily, a small shrine to survival done right. Life didn't need grand monuments, it needed gentle reminders. Over time, I began volunteering with a local veterans support group downtown, helping new service members transition out of uniform life. Many carried their own ghosts, PTSD, broken homes, regrets. I never told them my full story, but when someone hesitated to seek help, I'd say, "You're not weak for needing safety. You're strong for naming it." The message always landed. One evening, a young Navy corpsman asked, "How'd you get so calm about it?" I thought about the long journey from Raleigh to Fort Liberty to here, the bruises fading into memory. "I stopped trying to win," I said. "I started choosing peace instead. Wilmington taught me that freedom isn't fireworks, it's rhythm. Morning light through salt-streaked windows, a steady heartbeat that doesn't spike when someone knocks, a night of sleep that doesn't end in alarm." One Saturday, I drove to the edge of Wrightsville Beach just before dawn. The sky was lavender and pale blue, the tide low. I walked out until the water reached my calves and stood there, letting the cold bite into my skin. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead, and for the first time I didn't feel small. I felt infinite. I whispered, "You are safe now," not as reassurance, but as fact. Back home, I wrote my final journal entry for that chapter. Freedom isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of choice. Every sunrise I choose peace again. I closed the notebook, slipped it into a drawer, and opened a new one. Blank pages waiting. That night, the moon hung low over the water, and from my balcony, the reflection looked like a path of silver leading straight into tomorrow. I breathed in the sea air, steady and light. The storm was over. The calm had a name now. It was mine. What does freedom mean to you? Silence, distance, or choice? Tell me where you're watching from and what peace looks like in your life tonight. The email arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, its subject line as plain as the North Carolina sky. Outside my window, Veterans Council update, board revisions. I almost didn't open it. I'd learned to let the world move without me needing to react. But something about the timing, 7 months after the report, 4 since the final directive, made me pause. The message was brief. Effective immediately. Harold Caldwell has been removed from his remaining advisory positions on the State Veterans Council due to administrative non-compliance. There was no mention of me, no quotation, no attached letter, just the decision. I stared at the screen for a long time, a slow smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. He'd lost another title not because I'd spoken again, not because I'd lobbied or protested, but because the documentation existed. It lived in the system now silent and incorruptible. Paper had done what pain never could. It rendered truth permanent. That was the quietest form of revenge, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself or take pleasure in humiliation. It simply exists, waiting for accountability to find its own way home. I closed the laptop and stepped out onto the balcony. The morning was soft and bright, the ocean calm. The sound of gulls carried over the water, and the sun cut a golden line across the horizon. For the first time in my life, justice didn't look like punishment. It looked like stillness. Later that day, Clara knocked on my door, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like someone who just won something," she said. "Not won," I replied, taking the cup. "Just watched a storm finish dying." She laughed lightly. "That's poetic." Should I ask what kind of storm? The kind that used to control the weather in my head. She nodded as if she understood more than I'd said aloud. "You seem lighter lately," she said, "like you're not waiting for the other shoe to drop." "There is no other shoe," I said. "I dropped it myself." When she left, I sat with the coffee growing cold in my hands, replaying the quiet satisfaction of that email. No courtroom, no confrontation, no dramatic final words. Just a line in an administrative record that stripped away what he valued most, his reputation. My father had always taught me that image was survival. In the end, it was the truth he dismissed that erased his image completely. That evening, I took my notebook from the desk drawer and flipped to the final page. I wrote, "Silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the verdict itself." I looked around my apartment, the plant by the window, the framed photo from S1, the note from CPT Chin. Every object carried a quiet echo of resilience. The world had kept turning while the noise faded, and I had learned how to live inside that quiet. Weeks later, during a community event at the Veterans Center, I overheard two men talking near the coffee table. "You hear about Caldwell got pulled from the council?" "Yeah, heard he had compliance issues." "Shame. Used to be respected. Used to be," the other said simply. "They didn't know I was there, and I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The truth didn't need my voice anymore. It could stand alone." After the event, I walked down to the pier, letting the wind whip my hair across my face. The tide was coming in slow and steady. Each wave felt like punctuation, soft, final, inevitable. I thought about what Dalton had once told me. The opposite of trauma isn't happiness, it's clarity. That clarity was here now, reflected in the simple reality that justice doesn't have to be loud to be real. It just has to last. I thought of my father somewhere in Raleigh, probably telling himself a version of events that made sense to him. Maybe he still believed I'd betrayed him. Maybe he'd rewritten the story again, cast himself as the victim, told people the army exaggerated. It didn't matter anymore. The file existed. The dates, the signatures, the chain of command, they were facts he could never outtalk. Truth didn't shout. It documented. That was my revenge, not to ruin him, but to remove myself from his power and let time handle the rest. I returned home and made tea, the ocean still visible through the open balcony door. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill my lungs. The peace Lily had grown 2 new leaves since last week. I ran my finger over the glossy surface and smiled. Growth doesn't need an audience either. The next morning, I received a message from Andrea Morales' file officially archived at DOD retention. Case closed. Take care, 1LT. I replied simply, "Thank you for keeping the record straight." When I closed the phone, I realized that this was the real ending, not a courtroom victory or dramatic confrontation, but an administrative note buried in a database that would outlive everyone involved. A quiet monument to truth. I stood by the window watching the sunlight shimmer across the water and whispered, "It's done." No fireworks. No applause. Just the steady rhythm of the ocean and the soft click of the kettle in the kitchen. I'd spent years believing revenge required fire. Turns out it only required patience. The universe keeps its own ledgers, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let it balance them without interference. Before bed, I wrote my final sentence for the notebook. Revenge isn't noise, it's absence. Not the slam of a door, but the sound of it staying shut. Then I closed it for the last time. The next morning, when the light spilled through the window, I didn't feel the need to reach for my phone check for updates or measure progress. Justice had already finished its work. I poured coffee, stepped onto the balcony, and watched the horizon. The sea kept moving, steady and infinite. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to move with it. I could simply be still. Have you ever seen the truth take care of justice on its own? Tell me where you're watching from and what silence finally gave back to you. The morning light over Wilmington was soft and forgiving, the kind of light that makes the ocean shimmer like a secret. I stood on the balcony with a notebook in one hand and coffee in the other, the world finally quiet enough to hear my own breath. The waves rolled in slow rhythm below, brushing the shore like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. The apartment was still, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need to brace for noise. I leaned on the railing and wrote the final line in my notebook. Freedom isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of choice. The words came out steady without hesitation. They felt earned. For years, I'd thought freedom was about running from the people who hurt me, escaping the house, the silence, the control. But standing here now, I understood it differently. Freedom was the quiet moment after survival, the decision to stay in peace even when chaos called your name. Down below, two kids chased each other along the sand, their laughter drifting upward. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined telling my younger self, "You make it here." One day, you breathe without permission. The air carried the scent of salt and jasmine. My peace lily bloomed again, its petals catching the sun. Every small thing in this space, my desk, the framed note from Chin, the team photo from S1 wasn't just decor. It was proof of continuity. Each item represented a piece of the bridge that carried me from survival to life. As I watched the horizon, I realized I wasn't just free, I was safe. And safety, I'd learned, wasn't the same as silence. It was the ability to choose when to speak and when to rest. I opened my phone and drafted the closing words for my story, the same way a commander might write an after-action report, precise and calm, but with heart. If you've ever been told your story doesn't matter, let this one remind you it does. The truth stands whether or not they approve. I paused, then added one final invitation, the way CPT Chin had taught me to turn pain into participation. Have you ever had someone try to control your honor or rewrite your truth? Tell me where you're watching from your current time, and write one sentence you wish someone had said to defend you. I'll read every single one. That was my CTA, not a plea for sympathy, but a call for testimony. Because healing doesn't complete itself, it multiplies when others join in. I posted it, set the phone down, and stepped back outside to watch the sea swallow the sun. For a moment, the sky turned the color of embered gold, and I thought about everyone still stuck in their version of that examination room, still afraid to answer the question that could change everything. I whispered toward the waves, "You're allowed to speak now." The wind carried it away, maybe toward someone who needed to hear it. Over the next few weeks, messages began pouring into the channel I'd opened, veterans, spouses, students, even strangers. They didn't all share their full stories, just fragments, but every line carried weight. I wish someone had told me it wasn't my fault. I wish someone had said I deserved rest. I wish someone had noticed sooner. I read them all, sometimes late at night, sometimes before dawn, tears sliding down without permission but without shame either. This was community, the kind built not from pity, but from recognition. One night, a message came from a name I didn't recognize, Sergeant Alina Torres, Fort Liberty, 68W Combat Medic. It read, "Ma'am, we've never met, but I heard what you did for the Mentorship Network. I'd just finished a medical review today, and when the captain asked if I felt safe at home, I didn't lie. I think you made that question easier to answer. Thank you." I stared at the message for a long time, the kind of silence that fills your chest with pride and sorrow all at once. That was it, the handoff, the beginning of something bigger than me. The next morning, I called Chin. She picked up immediately. "Morning, Lieutenant?" "Captain," I said, smiling. "I think we have another story coming." "Good or bad?" she asked. "Real," I said. "A medic at Fort Liberty just spoke up. Maybe it's time for another chapter 1 that starts with her?" Chin was quiet for a moment. "Protocol that protects," she said, finally repeating the phrase we'd once used as a joke. "I like it. So do I." "Then write it," she said. "Keep the light on for the next soldier." After the call, I sat back down at my desk and opened a new document. The cursor blinked patiently at the top of the page, waiting. I titled it Protocol That Protects Part 1, The Medic Who Spoke. The story wouldn't be about pain this time. It would be about prevention, about courage passed forward. My version of revenge wasn't silence anymore. It was continuation. Outside, the morning light stretched across the waves. The horizon looked endless, not intimidating. I could almost see the future in it, other soldiers, other survivors, other quiet rooms where questions would be asked and truth would be heard without interruption. I turned back to the screen and began typing the first line. It started with one question, "Are you safe?" and one soldier brave enough to answer. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the gravity of beginning again. Freedom had given me peace, but purpose would give me continuity. Later that evening, as the sun sank and the world softened, I walked down to the beach barefoot. The sand was cool, the tide low, the ocean endless. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest rise without constraint. Around me, the world was quiet, but this quiet wasn't empty. It was full. Every wave was a heartbeat, every gust of wind, a reminder that I'd survived to witness calm. For years, I'd thought justice was a destination. Now, I knew it was a direction one I could keep walking, one that others could follow. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Your turn to breathe." Not to the ocean this time, but to whoever came next, because every story like mine only mattered if it made another possible. That's what freedom truly was, the ability to pass the light forward even if your own hands still shook. I turned toward the sound of the waves breaking, and the reflection of the moon stretched across the surface like a silver invitation. Tomorrow, I'd drive back to Fort Liberty to meet with Chin to start the mentorship extension for the Protocol That Protects program. But tonight, I just stood there letting the ocean air fill me until I felt whole. In that stillness, I smiled and whispered the same words that began my recovery months ago. "You are protected here." The wind carried them away, and I hoped someone somewhere heard them exactly when they needed to. CTA Final Golden Point. Have you ever had someone try to control your truth or your honor? Tell me your location and current time, and write one sentence you wish someone had said to protect you. I'll read them all. Your voice matters. The message came from a medic at Fort Liberty. She said, "I told the captain everything." That's where the next story begins.